Hello everyone, welcome to yet another day in this Clown Decade, the decade where things are only going to get worse before they get better, and if you want to stay up to date with all things Clown Decade, please do subscribe to the channel and become a member. But today we are celebrating a way in which the Clown Decade is getting better, which you will start to expect to see more and more as time goes on in this decade. Court rules asylum seekers must be moved from hotel. The Bell Hotel has been the centre of intense protest and counter-protests over the summer, and it appears that protesting actually works, which is something people really have to start realising. The type of protest that works, as Extinction Rebellion have shown us time and time again because we keep getting more and more mental net zero rules, is don't be violent, keep pushing. If you are going to disrupt, basically do it by dragging resources to yourself, even though you're not generally being violent. So the asylum seekers are due to be removed from an Essex hotel after a council was granted a temporary High Court injunction blocking them from being housed there. The injunction was sought by Epping Forest District Council to stop migrants being placed at the Bell Hotel in Epping, which is owned by Somani Hotels Limited. Thousands of people have protested near the hotel in recent weeks after an asylum seeker living there was charged with sexually assaulting a 14-year-old girl in the town. Mr Justice Erie made his judgment after refusing an 11th hour effort from the Home Secretary Yvette Cooper to get the council's case dismissed. Yes, that's right, you still have the Labour government trying their best to keep these hotels open, just as the Tory government were expanding it, because they kept running into human rights lawyers and activists saying, you can't put them in barracks, that's insane and that's against their human rights, despite the fact the barracks being perfectly well and good for our great men in the army. Asylum seekers must be moved out of the hotel by 4 o'clock on 12 September, the judge ruled. All 80 rooms at the hotel are seemingly occupied, and as of last month it was home to around 140 men, so just under 2 to a room. The Home Office has warned the decision would substantially impact its ability to house asylum seekers in hotels across the UK. Well, that was kind of the point. Anyway, the important thing you need to know here is that it was a Tory-run council. They obviously were worried about the protests and how they were risking irreparable harm and community tensions, and eventually said obviously that this is great news, and how this is all the beginning, not the end, but we will get into how the council has acted throughout all this later in the article, because they weren't always on the side of the protesters. Anyway, the BBC article is not very good at going through this, but the Times had a much better report saying that the judge said the fear of crime being committed by residents in the hotel, obviously that is, was a relevant factor, although a limited one, and was understandable that recent arrests from the basis of local concern. He said the Somani Hotel had sidestepped public scrutiny and explanation, and that if it had applied for planning permission, the council and local residents would have had a chance to air their concerns, and this is what it's all come down to. I have to give the NIMBYs credit. A NIMBY law in the Town and Country Planning Act, I think this was actually added onto it in the 80s or something like that, effectively makes it so that if you change the use of a building, you need to apply for planning permission for it, because the hotel was a tourist destination, or, hotel, whatever, and it has now been converted into effectively an asylum detention centre, even though we're not very good at detaining them. That is a major reuse of the hotel, and therefore had to go through planning permission, and it never did because the Home Office just did things anyway. If that had been done, there would have been a real prospect of concern being assuaged, either by an explanation provided in support of the application, or by the imposition of conditions enabling those with concern to be assured that appropriate measures were in place. The judge added, although the defendant's actions were not flagrant or surreptitious, they were deliberate. The defendant acted in good faith but chose to take its stand on the position that there was no material change of use. The defendant did so in the knowledge that the claimant, as local planning authority, took a different view and believed that the permission was necessary. It thereby sidestepped the public scrutiny and explanation which would otherwise have taken place if an application for planning permission or for a certified of lawful use had been made. These are laws that I usually absolutely hate, because it's this type of law that got Clarkson's farm into a whole harumph in season 2, whereby one dude with one friend in the council and a good barrister could go ahead and effectively say, I can't see the sky at 8 o'clock in the evening because of this open restaurant, and therefore it should never be allowed to be open. But in this case it's being used for things I like, so I'm going to overlook my problem with it. Anyway, this win has put the entire asylum accommodation in hotel scheme into doubt, as the High Court ruling basically shows that if you do not get consent from the local people, you're not putting these people in hotels, which is just crazy to think about. At first they were being put in things like the Bibby Stockholm and in the occasional ex-RAF base and things like that, but human rights lawyers came in and said, oh, can't do that anymore. Did Parliament try and change the laws on any of this? They absolutely didn't. And that's why you ended up having Tories showing off that they were procuring a hell of a load of hotels. Robert Jenrick did that as well, but we'll get into that later. And the simple fact of the matter is because they could not keep them in the detention centres because apparently it was against their human rights, and therefore that's why they had to throw out a whole bunch of money to hotel owners who ended up on the Sunday Times rich list just a year later, and this is why now Serco's buying up a load of houses and landlords are kicking out single mothers with their kids to make way for 5 Afghanistanis or whatever it is. Ministers are braced for a wave of applications by local authorities to close migrant hotels after Epping Forest District Council was granted a temporary injunction to prevent the Bell Hotel from housing asylum seekers. The council argued it had become a feeding ground for unrest. The ruling came despite an 11th hour attempt by the Home Office to block the injunction, and the lawyers representing the department suggested that granting the application could imperil the government's ability to provide enough housing for asylum seekers. They warned that there could be similar applications made that would then aggravate pressures on the asylum estate, and that the injunction applications could become the new norm adopted by local authorities. And here I am praying that it does. Because this is what Labour, and to be quite frank, an awful lot of the Tories are never going to get. We don't want these illegal migrants here. We don't want the foreign criminals here. We want them deported. That has been a popular position for quite some time. But they are more interested in the ECHR, human rights laws, basically in their own morals, in which they effectively see themselves as stewards of all people of the world. And obviously the assumption is that people would only ever cross the channel to try and get to safety, despite the fact they were safe in France. And things like this are exactly why we've seen 50,000 people come over in the 13 months of being under this god-awful Labour government. That is actually a record, and that is a record that I doubt is going to be broken again, but, well, I suppose we'll have to see. So firstly, I think it's fair to give credit where credit is due to the people that fired the starting pistol that kicked off these protests, and that certainly has to go to the locals of Epping, and in part, of course, to, well, the Homeland Party, though I'm not sure Callum is still part of the Homeland Party. I don't try and keep up with these things, but there is no doubt that the Times even gave them credit for starting these protests, and it's ended up here with a total victory. Gotta give credit where credit's due. As a party, I think they're absolutely useless and I want them nowhere near power, but as a protest group, if this is what they focus on, along with cleaning up streets and graffiti, they'll do just fine. And I think that would be good as their place in the system. This, of course, then blew up into the mums of Epping, as they have been dubbed, coming out effectively to protect and protest for the safety of their daughters. Years ago, I probably would have been saying, what about the men and what about the boys? But let's be real here. There's a reason that throughout history we really have only cared about the women, and that is, well, because men are expendable. And let's also be fair here, framing everything in the feminist lens in this day and age seems to still get you quite far in politics. Do I like it that way? No, not particularly. Has it worked in this case? Yeah, so why not use it? At the end of the day, we all want, well, everyone protected from violence, let's be real here, but it is a higher priority for men to protect women and girls because, well, women and girls aren't going to be completely successful in protecting themselves from men. And after all, this was also an incident where it was a male asylum seeker sexually harassing a girl. Anyway, Reform's only councillor in Epping was celebrating this, of course, and when a Tory activist came out asking why, if Conservative leader Kemi Badenoch and Conservative Robert Jenrick were there, did Reform not turn up, such as Nigel Farage, Jamie McIver came out saying, because all Reform UK councillors at Epping Forest were standing shoulder to shoulder with our residents at every protest, not watching from the live stream. Nigel Farage, however, is busy preparing for government and so obviously could not turn up there. And that's true, Jamie was seen at these protests almost every day, as were a few Reform candidates. It was clear that they care, and it was also on the agenda for reform quite clearly. They were happy talking about it in interviews and things like that, and how something must be done. Having said that, credit where credit's due, it is right that the Tory council were using initiative and finding a way to use the planning system against the hotel, but we'll get into why I don't particularly want to give them all the credit, and I'm happy to give much more credit to the protesters especially. It's also just worth pointing out at this point that it's no secret that Nigel Farage spends thousands of pounds on his personal security because he does get death threats. And going out in public at a, let's face it, not tightly organised protest, it was a loosely organised one, you don't know who's going to be there or what's going to happen. So just from a, I have all these other priorities and a personal safety view, kind of makes sense why he didn't turn up. The same can't exactly be said for Kemi Badenoch because they're not important enough to get death threats. Anyway, it appears that not all Tories are on the side of Kemi Badenoch and Robert Jenrick here, as Ian Dale, hosting his LBC show, was having a little conversation with Jamie McIver.
It is an insult to British people that people come to this country illegally, break the law, get put into a hotel and then get fed. They need to be away from schools. They need to be away from young children. They need to be away from communities like Epping. That is the point.
Yeah, that is the point. We don't want them here. I mean, obviously he's saying like Epping because he's an Epping Forest District Councillor, but reality of the situation is that no councillor really wants these at all. Maybe Green councillors do, I don't know, but how many hotels are being set up in Bristol? Or in Brighton, for that fact? I don't know, probably not many. They always seem to be in relatively poor areas. Aside from, obviously, the Canary Wharf one, that seems to be a bit of an outlier. But yeah, this is the reality. People just want them deported. They don't want them anywhere in the country.
That is the point.
So not in my backyard. As long as they're somewhere else, I couldn't give a damn about them.
Don't walk their dog
no, of course I don't. Of course I don't. But you can't. What you're effectively labelling them, you're tying them all with the same brush. You're basically saying every single asylum seeker is a danger to your child, and that's a disgrace.
Every single one is a potential danger. That is true. Some of them may be very nice. That is also true. However, the fact of the matter is that they shouldn't be here. They have crossed illegally, and we know that there is an entire industrial complex where they are literally, like for most benefits in Britain, there is a whole industry where they train them to lie and say things to get free stuff. Whether that's out of desperation or just out of greed, I do not care. They should not be here. And try to call them a NIMBY. NIMBY is the popular position. Why would you even try that?
What would I do if I was the Home Secretary today?
Well, I know what you would do. I know what you would do if you were Home Secretary today, but the fact is you're not. Thank God you're not a Labour. Thank God you're not a Home Secretary. It doesn't really matter what you would do because we have a government, we have the current law, and therefore the current government has to decide what to do with people when they come into this country. Now,
this, by the way, is the average Tory outlook. I don't care what Robert Jenrick, Suella Braverman say. This is the average outlook. And this is how they acted for years, and how quite clearly the Tory outlook is still going. This is the law. We're going to do very little to try and change the law. The most we did was try and make law say that Rwanda is a safe country, which wasn't the worst idea in the world, which then can be used as a deterrent, and then hopefully it will ease the flow, and then we can deal with the issue slightly better. It didn't work. I mean, obviously it didn't work because the Lords came out and said you can't just declare somewhere safe, and actually Parliament being sovereign, they pretty much can do that. However, they were doing all this because they still want to keep the ECHR, they still want to keep the Human Rights Act, And what's the policy at the moment? It's still just, we'll review the whole thing. And you've got, Robert Jenrick and Katie Lamb, the only two really coming out saying, we need to get rid of it. Both of whom were in positions to make that argument 2-3 years ago, and only really started doing it once they started to get battered by Reform in the polls. Sorry, Tory activists, but that ain't it. Anyway, on to other Tories. Kemi Badenoch obviously was happy. Her tweet's there, I'm not reading it. Moving on, Suella obviously came out after the Waterlooville victory. She was happy for that as well and went there for a speech. Also said a victory for the patriotic common sense majority when it came to Epping, so all very good there. Suella, I at least believe, is on the side of I actually want this problem sorted. I believe it mostly with Suella out of all Tories. she's just a very weak politician. Jenrick, as it's no secret, is one that I am deeply suspicious of. Obviously, once again, he is congratulating Epping, saying they protested, were smeared, but have won. Yeah, you know, that's true, they were smeared. Do you know who they were smeared by, Mr. Jenrick? They were smeared by Tories. Because this is Holly Whitbread, just 3 weeks ago in the council chamber, making a speech about the protest being held outside of the Bell Hotel.
I agree with the words to close the hotel, but I would never knowingly stand next to a neo-Nazi, which is what a member in this chamber did on Sunday.
Alright, at least she's in favour of closing the hotel, but yeah, all these people standing next to a neo-Nazi, don't you know? Obviously this is the indication of the Homeland Party, which, to be honest with you, they seem to be trying their best to try and shed that from their public image, which I don't blame them for, and to be honest, because I concentrate on them, they've done quite well with, but they'll get absolutely no credit from the mainstream media for that. Instead, the mainstream will just keep calling them neo-Nazis, which is why you need to get out the scum quite early.
We should also call out with people with views which do not represent our community. These people do not talk for Britain, they're not British values, and quite frankly, I think anyone who stands side by side with them should hang their heads in shame. It's disgraceful.
Anyway, Kemi Badenoch and Robert Jenrick obviously were pictured many times with standing shoulder to shoulder with people at these protests, despite the fact that some of them were still being organised by Homelanders and they were seen at every single one, given that, you know, it's their local area. That makes sense. And obviously Jamie McIver was taking absolutely none of it, pointing out that Holly Whitbread was making tweets about this as well, saying shouting about pigs with their heads in the trough is straight out of the BNP playbook. Anyway, she was obviously pressured into finding a way to deal with this hotel, and obviously went ahead with the judicial route. Anyway, with this victory, obviously, Holly was interviewed by Radio 4 about what the next steps are, and, well, they do sound a lot closer to what I would like to hear from councillors. Annoyingly, I can't actually rip this video from Twitter for some reason, but it doesn't really matter. All you need to know is that this is an interim injunction. It's going to go through the proper planning phases, and the council is going to do everything it can, effectively, to make sure that you cannot get the change to the planning regulation needed or permission needed to carry on using this hotel as asylum accommodation. Perfectly fine, it's what I would expect now. It's very good that she has been pushed forward to do this and has gone off trying to call the protesters and the people that go there, including her own party MPs, people who stand shoulder to shoulder with neo-Nazis. Anyway, on to the people that have been complaining about the use of hotels since 2020 and possibly even before that, rather than when their seat in Parliament was threatened by not dealing with it properly. Nigel Farage had a whole statement saying this is a victory for the parents and concerned residents of Epping. They do not want their young women being assaulted on the streets, so this community stood up bravely despite being slandered as far right and have won. They represented the vast majority of decent people in the country. Young undocumented males who break into the UK legally should not be free to walk the streets anywhere. They must be detained and deported. I hope that Epping provides inspiration to others across the country. Thank you, Mr. Farage. Very cool. Farage also wrote a piece in The Telegraph explaining how Epping has shown the way to win, and we must now detain and deport the thousands of illegal immigrants who have no business being in Britain. Great way to try and jump on this. So the High Court has ruled that illegal immigrants can no longer be housed at the Bell Hotel, and this is a great victory for the parents and concerned residents of Epping. It's also an inspiration for the rest of Britain. They do not want their young women being abused and assaulted on the streets. They've protested outside the hotel since July, when an Ethiopian asylum seeker housed there was arrested and charged with sexually assaulting a 14-year-old schoolgirl. Despite being slandered as far right by the establishment and attacked by left-wing Antifa thugs, this community stood up bravely and they have won. They represent the vast majority of decent people in this country. Very true, Mr. Farage. Now, the good people of Epping must inspire similar protests around Britain, where people are concerned about the threat posed by young undocumented males living in local hotels and who are free to walk the streets. They should follow the example of the town in Essex. I'm completely with Nigel Farage. I have absolutely no problem with these protests, and as I have said, they tend to do very, very well when there are a decent amount of women there too. If you are masking up and causing trouble, that's when it all starts falling apart. But here's the important part. I can say today that the English local councils controlled by the party I lead, Reform UK, will be doing everything in their power to follow Epping's lead. We are told that some 32,000 asylum seekers are now housed in British hotels, many of them young undocumented males who have broken into the UK illegally, and they should not be treated as privileged guests at taxpayers' expense and should not be free to walk our streets. The Labour government must now answer the question, whose side are you on? Will Keir Starmer's government side with decent people of Epping and elsewhere, who have had enough of seeing their young women harassed in the street by illegal immigrants and their communities changed for the worse by migrant hotels? Will Labour change policy and put a stop to it? Or will the government try to overturn the court's verdict and continue to side with the illegal immigrants? A record 50,000 illegal immigrants have crossed the English Channel since Labour was elected last year. And the signs are not good. The top lawyers representing the Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper, made a desperate last-minute bid to stop Mr Justice Erie, granting an injunction to Epping Council on Tuesday. Shame on her. And you get the idea there. Labour aren't on your side. We've seen this be successful. Do go out and protest. We completely encourage that, because this is absolutely something you should be protesting, and that hopefully will force councils that are not reformed, because we're planning to do this anyway, into doing what Epping did. Whereas reform councils still protest, though, will absolutely try the same thing. Because if there is one unbeatable force in this country, it is definitely the NIMBYs with the Town and Country Planning Act on their side, to my dismay. However, if they use it to destroy immigration and then we get rid of the Town and Country Planning Act, I will be a very happy man. This sentiment was, of course, echoed by Richard Tice, the Deputy Leader on Times Radio today.
Yes, absolutely. Our council leaders will be instructing legal departments to pursue all legal avenues after this ruling, which is very significant because it's a temporary injunction based on the fact that there has been a material change in use of the building from a hotel, and that's the temporary injunction. So all the reform councils will be pursuing this.
Which is all, of course, very good to see. And as I say, I've no doubts that the Tories are now going to try and use the same playbook. I mean, it was a Tory council that went down this avenue in the first place, and they found mush. And so guess what? The right-of-centre parties are going to be pushing even more into the mush. Anyway, as mentioned before, the reason I've been so flippant about Tories throughout this whole ordeal is because some of them were part of the smear campaign. Obviously, other Tories thought that that was ridiculous. I'm fine with that. I understand they're not a monolith. But the people that they have in charge and are going to be putting in charge after, say, Kemi is being defenestrated later in the year, which is quite likely to happen. The right wing of the party replacement, Robert Jenrick, was, well, frankly, part of the problem. I mean, you can certainly say, oh, it's the civil service, ministers really can't do much, all of this stuff. Whether that is true or not, kind of irrelevant to the whole thing. Here is Robert Jenrick being shown his own words on GB News from 2022.
Which is that the Tories had 14 years at this, and that actually the Tories were ultimately responsible for the initial phase of the migrant hotels. I am going to play a little clip here now, which I'm sure you're sick of seeing, but I'd love to get your reaction of. It's a clip about the migrant hotels during your time in the last government.
We have procured more hotels very rapidly, and more are coming on board literally every day. More hotels have been coming online almost every month throughout the whole of this year. So Suella Braverman and her predecessor, Priti Patel, were procuring more hotels. What I have done in my short tenure is ramp that up and procure even more.
Which, yeah, doesn't sound entirely good, and is a point I do want to make. The hotel situation in general is absolutely a Tory issue that they pretty much made themselves. They didn't secure the border, they weren't deporting people, they were bowing down effectively to the ECHR, which meant that the Home Office then had to, well, do everything the ECHR said, which was, oh, these people deserve all these human rights, so you can't deport them, therefore they need to go somewhere. At first, obviously, it was, oh, well, put them somewhere that isn't very nice. Oh, human rights lawyers come along and say, well, that's not good enough for them. And so they end up having to land on hotels, and that carries on until the backlog is done with. And part of the point of the Rwanda scheme was to deter them so that you could get through the backlog and then you could actually secure the border again. Why can't you just do what Farage and Reform want to do, which is detain and deport. Rupert Lowe as well, if you want me to mention him. Oh, you have to leave ECHR, rewrite the Human Rights Act. There's probably about 10 other laws that are related to this too that can be used, so you need to get rid of all of them. Basically, it all gets very, very complicated, and there's international refugee conventions that you're a part of as well that you'll need to leave. Basically, it was all more complex than just telling people to shut up and enjoy having illegal migrants put next to them. But anyway, we'll let Robert Jenrick respond here.
So what do you think when you see that back now? What's your attitude? What would be your response to that?
Well, let me be very clear about what that is. Zia Youssef from Reform put that out. He didn't give any of the context around that. And earlier today, if you look on my Twitter account, you'll see that I've completely taken apart the nonsensical argument that he made. I became Immigration Minister at a time when the camp in Manston was out of control, complete chaos. In fact, there'd been an attack on the camp and the reception centre that we had in Dover. And so we had to do something in that moment to get some of the migrants out. And we didn't want to just let them loose on the streets of Kent.
So you get the idea there. The whole context of we want more hotels is because there are already a bunch of illegal migrants here. We're starting to get overcrowding. There's a big backlog going on, so just stick them in hotels instead, which was always going to be a disaster. And we already had some of them in hotels, by the way, before this, which was already seen as a disaster. And so Robert Jenrick's plan, open more hotels because it's better than the overcrowding situation. It's becoming unlawful. We have to operate within the law, therefore procure a load of hotels. Anyway, I found the original clip and decided to give it a look through. So let's take a look at some of the highlights.
Conditions are poor at the site. They are improving. We are trying to ensure that as many people as possible leave the site to better accommodation, mostly in hotels, as quickly as possible.
So yeah, it's not unfair to say that Robert Jenrick played a pivotal role in the housing asylum seekers in hotels problem. Was it better than the overcrowding position? Yeah, probably. Is it worse than just deporting them anyway? Obviously. Hence, Robert Jenrick is now very much on the side of, oh, ECHR, get rid of it, deport these people. But it's very hard to trust someone when they were in this position and, well, effectively making the conditions for the problem even worse.
It's a site where people are brought to very soon after they're saved at sea or on beaches by Border Force and Royal Navy personnel. They're then taken to Dover, given immediate care in extremis, and then brought to this site.
So this was how things were happening, and at this point I believe Robert Jenrick was in the position for about a month. But the language of all this, I think it's important to talk about. The language has changed in Robert Jenrick very quickly in 2.5 years. It's gone from there being saved by the Royal Navy and the RNLI in the ocean and the beaches, and now effectively he's on board with calling it, of course, an invasion. Funny I should bring that up because that was brought up in this interview too.
We had the Home Secretary describing this as an invasion on the South Coast. I mean, would you characterise it like that?
Well, in a job like mine, you have to choose your words very carefully.
Indeed.
And I would never demonise people coming to this country in pursuit of a better life. And I understand and appreciate our obligation to refugees. In fact, I've had for much of this year a Ukrainian refugee family staying with me in my own home.
Very good for that, but you are getting the picture I'm painting. Obviously, 2.5 years ago, there's a reason Robert Jenrick was always known as Robert Generic. He is just an NPC who is going to go along with whatever he thinks will keep his seat and job. I'm afraid to say you can't really trust people like that, because we had 14 years of that and look where it got us. But having said all that, I don't particularly want to dwell on this particular bit. Let's look at the full context of the clip that was being used by Zia Youssef and more widely by Reform as well. Hell, even Nigel Farage did his own bit on this.
Having just been in the job for a handful of days or having to do this suggests that when Suella Braverman was asked in the House of Commons yesterday whether she herself had stopped the procurement of extra hotels and she denied that, well, that suggests that perhaps she wasn't being entirely truthful.
So Robert Jenrick is specifically being asked about the procurement of hotels. Are more being procured or are more not being procured? Because obviously you need to procure more if you can't fit everyone at Marston and these other detention sites.
No, that's not correct. More hotels have been coming online almost every month throughout the whole of this year. So Suella Braverman and her predecessor, Priti Patel, were procuring more hotels. What I have done in my short tenure is ramp that up and procure even more, because November, historically, has been one of the highest months of the year for migrants illegally crossing the Channel.
So game, set and match, yeah, this is Robert Jamrick saying that, OK, I'm bringing an end to their procurement, I'm procuring even more than them. Almost boasting about it. Because, oh, look, it says elsewhere in the interview, listen, I understand that a lot of these men are here, are prosperous enough to afford the people traffickers, and are here and shouldn't be and should be deported. Fine, that's all good. But he clearly cares more about getting the people out of Marston who are not in great conditions. Fine. But putting them into hotels instead, rather than fast-tracking them to a red rubber stamp and getting them on a plane back to Albania, which should have been the position, and the position pretty much everyone wanted.
We have to be prepared for that because, quite rightly, as a country, we want to treat migrants in the most humane and compassionate way possible. But it is worth saying, the root cause of the problem is the sheer number of people choosing to make that dangerous journey and putting immense pressure on our system. Because
That's not completely unreasonable, but as I say, very generic for a late 2022 talking point. I just wanted to make it clear that the point that Reform are making, which was that the procurement of hotels was largely done under the Tory government, is largely true and is pretty much what Jamrick was saying the plan was. Do you want to see what the result of this was? Bear in mind, that was released on the 1st November 2022, so here's a fun little graph. I would like you to bear in mind that when it comes to Robert Jamrick's tenure as Immigration Minister, he went from September 2022 to October 2023. He was in there for just over a year. And as you can see from this graph, from January 2023 to September 2023, it went up. And in fact, it peaked. It only started going down again after Robert Jamrick left as Immigration Minister and after Suella Braverman left as Home Secretary. Literally under their time in the Home Office, the damn asylum hotel problem peaked. And oddly enough, it went down again under, of all people, James Cleverly, who oversaw the steep decline in the number of asylum seekers in hotels. Now, did he do this with the house of multiple occupancy route? Almost definitely. That's going to be the next big one. But just realistically here, the problem is, as Robert Jamrick said before, the people crossing in the first place. Have either party done anything about that? No, absolutely nothing. They've both failed incredulously at that. And it's why Robert Jamrick's defences seem so lacklustre. Oh, I only put them in hotels because I had to, despite the fact that, as he says, he understands the issue, as every Tory did, and nobody in the team, including Jamrick himself, seemed to want to do anything about it, until finally Reform come along, get populist, say leave the ECHR, and now the Tory position is anywhere from, OK, review the damn thing, Kemi Badenoch, all the way over to, obviously we've got to leave the damn thing, you know, the Reform position, which is Robert Jamrick. Which, as I say, why would you believe him when he is the most generic man alive and all his positions seem to rely on, how do I keep my seat and climb the greasy pole? Because there's clearly a belief that the Tories can recover from this, but honestly, with their record, I just can't see it happening. But you may be surprised, and there's always the old adage of never bet against the Tories. But this time round, I think it's quite clear that the, well, real opposition, that is Reform, basically have an absolute no-mercy policy when it comes to old ministers, unless they are happy to write, yes, we made a huge mistake and I was absolutely massively part of the problem, and only join Reform at most as some sort of advisor on how to govern. And it looks like Suella and Robert Jamrick are not going to be given that olive branch because, well, frankly, they were actually just incredibly bad at their jobs anyway. That seems to be the conclusion that I can make from this. So, frankly, I am completely on board with all the attacks on Jamrick, and to be frank with you, Tories de lend arrest once again. He might be saying very good things now, but if I'm being completely honest with you, I'm completely cynical about the whole thing, and it seems quite obvious to me that it is in a play to try and become Tory leader, which I don't think will happen anyway. I think it will be James Cleverly. And on top of that, at the end of the day, if you are going to try and out-reform Reform, why do you think anyone's going to believe you after your record of literally peaking the amount of asylum hotels we've ever had in Britain. I suppose one more thing I should touch upon before I close out is that Robert Jenrick has made the point that under him and James Cleverly, they ordered the closure of this particular hotel, which is obviously the one over in Epping, and it was reopened by Labour. All well and good, but the fact of the matter is, okay, this is the one hotel, maybe, might literally be the only one, that ended up closing. Fact of the matter is, under you, we got a record number of asylum hotels, so I would not be trying to find the exception to your rules to try and pretend that you were on side the whole time. So there you go. Right, with that, that's everything I have for you for today. Vote Reform, Tories to lend arrest, etc, etc, etc. If you enjoy what I do, please do subscribe, leave a like, leave a comment. You can also become a channel member or leave super chats or super thanks in any video or stream that I do. If you enjoy what I do as well, please do watch videos that come out as and when I can make them, usually once a day, in the weekdays that is. You can also catch the live streams. There will be some Hollow Knights being played on Thursday, there will be Laughing at the Guardian on Saturday, and a Tosh Talks next Tuesday. Right, with that, that's everything I had for you for today. Once again, thank you very much for watching, and until next time, goodbye.